Welcome to Thinking Deeper by 6-7. Right out of the gate, we are putting the cosmic drama of God and the devil under the microscope. By exploring the Jehovah's Witness theology as detailed in our source today, we are going to dive into massive questions regarding the problem of evil, God's sovereignty, and the logical gymnastics often used to explain human suffering. It's a fascinating look at how a strict duality of good and evil is constructed and the atheistic critiques that naturally arise from these narratives.
Yeah, it's an incredibly rich area of study. When you strip away that familiar Sunday school veneer, you are left with a really profound psychological framework.
Exactly. And to navigate this, we're drawing from a highly detailed video transcript titled Satan, the real protagonist of the Jehovah's Witness religion. The mission for this deep dive is to unpack why Satan is considered the primary driver of this theology. We'll explore the bizarre lore surrounding demons and analyze the profound psychological impact this worldview has on its followers.
Right, because it really does shape their entire reality.
It does. And before we transition into the historical background, I want to say to you listening right now, if you like my channel, please subscribe and press the like button. So let's start with the origin story of the ultimate villain. The concept of the devil he wasn't always a supernatural being with pitchforks and fire, right?
No, not at all. The historical foundation here is really important. If you look at the Old Testament, Satan wasn't a devil. It was simply a Hebrew term meaning opposer.
Like a job title almost.
Exactly, an adversary. So the snake in Eden was literally just a talking snake. And the Satan figure we see in the book of Job, he was actually a celestial prosecutor working for Yahweh.
Working for him.
Yes. It wasn't until the Second Temple period that the modern devil figure began to really take shape. And that was heavily influenced by Persian Zoroastrianism.
Which had that strict good versus evil duality.
Right. They had a supreme god of light and a supreme spirit of darkness. So that dualistic framework seeped into the theology over time.
Which brings us to, honestly, the most mind-bending premise from our source today. In this specific worldview, Satan is actually the main character. He's the protagonist who initiates the entire biblical plot.
It sounds so counterintuitive, but the source explains that in this theology, Jehovah didn't foresee Satan's rebellion.
Because if he had,
God would be directly responsible for evil. He would have knowingly created a flawed system.
So to avoid that, the theology claims Satan forces God's hand in Eden.
Exactly. God is caught off guard, essentially, and has to scramble to create a backup plan, which they identify as the Genesis prophecy about the woman's offspring crushing the serpent.
It's a massive theological pivot just to address the problem of evil. And the source dives deep into the atheistic critiques of this. Like, how does this religion justify God allowing 6,000 years of suffering?
Well, they use this illustration. It's called the teacher analogy. They tell their followers to imagine a rebellious student who claims the teacher is wrong and insists he can run the class much better.
And so the teacher, instead of just expelling him, lets the student run the class to prove to everyone that the student is unqualified.
Right. The logic is that if the teacher just used his authority, the other students might think the rebel was right. So he has to let it play out to prove a point.
But the source absolutely tears this apart logically, because a real teacher wouldn't let a rebellious student take over and start, beating up the rest of the class.
No, it would be wildly irresponsible.
Yet Jehovah allows thousands of years of human suffering, disease, wars, just to win an argument in front of millions of watching angels.
It's a profound critique. It asks whether this is divine benevolence or just a terrifying prioritization of God's own administrative authority.
And nothing highlights that better than the book of Job. Satan basically wagers that Job only serves God for rewards for wealth and health.
And God's response is deeply unsettling when you really look at it. He allows Satan to destroy Job's health.
To literally kill his children.
Yes. Purely to prove a point to the devil, it really forces you to ask what that says about a strict demand for loyalty versus actual love.
We really ask you, the listener, to reflect on that. What does it say when divine benevolence is eclipsed by winning a cosmic bet? It's intense. But speaking of the devil's actions on Earth, let's get into the demon lore. Because it gets wild.
Oh, it gets incredibly detailed.
The ancient demon lore from Genesis. Angels up in heaven supposedly looking down and feeling actual physical lust for human women.
Which is strange for spirit creatures, but the lore states they came to Earth, built physical human bodies for themselves, and fathered giant hybrid babies.
The Nephilim.
Right. And they corrupted the earth so badly that Geffert had to use the flood to physically reset humanity. The half-demon children drowned, and those rebel angels were cast into a dark spiritual prison called Tartarus.
So now they're trapped, and they are portrayed as having actual, literal magic, not just illusions.
Real magic. A specific detail the source mentions is the Egyptian priests. When Moses turned his staff into a snake, the priests replicated that exact trick. In this theology, that was genuine demonic magic.
And it gets even more specific. There's this totally unique Jehovah's Witness belief about the Star of Bethlehem. Most people think of it as a divine guide, right? But they teach that it was actually Satan who placed that star in the sky.
Which is a fascinating inversion. Because the star led the wise men first to King Herod.
Right, to alert this paranoid king about a rival baby king.
Exactly. So it was an elaborate demonic assassination plot to get baby Jesus murdered. It wasn't a holy sign at all.
That is such a dark twist. And this whole cosmic chess match supposedly hits a massive turning point in the year 1914.
Yes, 1914 is the linchpin of their modern cosmology. That's the year Jesus, operating under his alter ego Michael the Archangel.
Which is a whole other theological deep cut.
Truly. But Michael defeats Satan in a heavenly war and throws him down to earth. And the source uses this perfect analogy. Satan is now like a cornered, rabid dog.
Highly dangerous, furious, and trapped on this tiny planet.
Right. And that immense anger is their official explanation for the world wars and all the increasing debauchery in the modern world.
And this brings us to how this theology actually impacts the daily life of a believer. Because if Satan is a cornered, rabid dog, that means there is an everyday demonic threat. They are watching 24/7.
It creates a baseline of absolute paranoia. There's this concept of the two tables from 1 Corinthians 10:21. You are either eating at Jehovah's table or you are eating at the demon's table.
There is absolutely no gray area.
None. And that mindset breeds some truly bizarre urban legends. The source mentions stories of possessed Murph dolls walking right out of kingdom halls.
The levitating beds.
Respected elders being physically choked by invisible hands during prayers.
And these aren't just spoopy stories. The source explains that they are used to control behavior. They blame these events on people owning occult items or amulets, right?
Yes, exactly. A tourist souvenir or a wind chime is seen as an open portal inviting demons into your home.
And that fear of portals extends directly to entertainment. Watching movies about wizards or vampires or using tarot cards and horoscopes.
It's seen as a gateway drug to Satan worship.
They even have a video where a child's toy wizard has to be thrown in the trash. Just the physical representation of magic invites a demonic presence.
Which is an incredibly sophisticated psychological tool. Because by making the demonic threat omnipresent, the religion can immediately invalidate other religions.
Wow, so?
Well, any supernatural experience outside the Jehovah's Witness faith is dismissed as a demonic trick. If a Catholic sees a vision or a Pentecostal speaks in tongues, a witness doesn't have to engage with it theologically. It's just demons trying to mislead people.
So basically, everyone outside the faith is worshiping Satan, whether they know it or not.
Exactly. It completely insulates the believer from competing worldviews.
But the source points out this gets into really dangerous territory when it comes to blaming the victim.
Yeah.
We have to report on their analysis of a Watchtower brochure titled Spirits of the Dead.
Right. That brochure literally blames demons for real-world illnesses, sexual abuse, clinical insanity, and suicide.
Which the source argues is incredibly irresponsible. It bypasses the need for medical care or accountability for abusers.
The source also highlights something very uncomfortable. That specific brochure heavily targets audiences in Africa, relying on borderline racist tropes about witchcraft. It shifts the blame for systemic human issues onto invisible spirits.
It creates such a dark reality, you have to be terrified of amulets and throwaway toys. But there's this ultimate irony to wrap up this section. Amulets are strictly forbidden, but the very name of Jehovah is used as a verbal talisman.
It really is. If they feel under demonic attack, they are instructed to forcefully call out Jehovah's name to ward off the spirits. It functions exactly like a magical spell.
So all this paranoia, the 6,000-year battle, it all leads to the endgame, Armageddon.
Right, the grand finale. Satan is finally locked in an abyss for 1,000 years while the earth is restored to a paradise.
But then there's a loophole. He's released for one final test to mislead humanity again, and then finally destroyed in a lake of fire.
Yes. But as the source playfully notes, if human and angels still have absolute free will in this paradise, What stops another angel from rebelling a million years later?
Does the whole nightmare start over?
The official theological advice for that logical loophole is basically just don't think about it.
Just don't think about it. Wow. So connecting this back to you, the listener, why does all this matter?
Because it synthesizes perfectly how exhausting the mental load of living under constant surveillance by a supreme evil really is. One mistake could mean your destruction. Studying these frameworks gives us a really deep insight into human psychology.
And the mechanisms of control.
Exactly. How we historically try to explain the origin of evil and how fear binds a community together.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, what is a final provocative thought we can leave the listener with today?
I would ask this. If a belief system relies entirely on the constant, invisible threat of a supreme evil to enforce loyalty, does that reflect the ultimate power of its God, or simply the immense power of human fear?
That is definitely something to ponder long after this deep dive ends. Thank you for thinking deeper with us.